Time for the mailbag. If you have questions, you can email me, thesolomonster@gmail.com. Please include your name and where you are from. I apologize. It's going to be a more abbreviated version of the mailbag this week. I've had no time this week to do all the things I want to do. And at the same time, I got a crush of questions in the last few days. So my inbox is just packed and I haven't been able to pull as many out of there as I wanted to. So I'm not going to get to as many this week as I usually do, but hopefully next week will be kind of semi back to normal. Oliver Norgrove wrote a blog. He wanted my thoughts on it regarding how to legitimize WWE's women's revolution. He pitches them doing a women's Royal Rumble, even if only with half the number of women as they have men in the Rumble. He also thinks that they should do a women's Elimination Chamber match and a women's Money in the Bank ladder match. I am not a fan of the Rumble idea, and I've said this before, only because I think having two Rumbles on one show is probably overkill. But he's not wrong. In fact, he's probably right and I'm probably wrong in that there's no reason for them not to do a women's version of the Rumble. You know, if they want to treat the women as equals, then they should have something similar. Like, you know, it's Survivor Series. When they do a Survivor Series elimination match with the men, they usually have at least one women's elimination match at Survivor Series. So it does make sense. So maybe the solution there is you open the show with the smaller women's Rumble match, and then you close the show with the bigger men's Rumble. So you kind of bookend the show with two Rumbles. That might be the way to go. Doing a women's chamber match, I think, is fine. Doing a Money in the Bank match is fine. My reservation about the Money in the Bank match has more to do with safety. The fact is, not every woman on that roster is a giant like Charlotte. Charlotte's a tall girl. There's a lot of tiny women on that roster. They would have to I would think they would have to lower the briefcase closer down to the ring if they were going to do it. I mean, can you imagine Alexa Bliss, even from the very top of a normal size ladder, trying to reach up and grab anything, try to reach up and grab a belt or a briefcase? Like, she'd get to the top of the ladder and she'd still need stilts to reach the freaking thing. You've got to take their size into consideration when it comes to stuff like that. And generally, the women are not as big as the men. So again, the simple solution might just be, well, lower it closer to the ring. But I just think back to Charlotte and Sasha in that Hell in a Cell match, and I think back to Charlotte throwing Sasha onto that table. And instead of it breaking, watching Sasha roll right off the table. She weighs so little that thing didn't even break. So some adjustments have to be made. That, and here's the other reason. You could do it, but you gotta do some things first. I would feel a lot more comfortable watching a match like that with them if they had some of the women in singles ladder matches before the Money in the Bank match. Now, I'm not saying that every week in the build to Money in the Bank, you give away a bunch of ladder matches. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if they decide in their mind, you know what, we should do a women's Money in the Bank match, in the months beforehand, you should find a way to book one or two ladder matches, whether it's on TV or another pay-per-view for the championship, with some of the women who have not had experience working ladder matches before. So that at least would get them accustomed and comfortable with working in that type of environment and using the ladder as a weapon and not freaking killing each other. Because I don't know that any of these women, maybe some of them like Becky or someone on the independents work ladder matches, but I don't think we've ever seen a women's ladder match of any kind in WWE. We've now seen we've seen women's cage matches before. We've seen a women's Hell in a Cell. But when it comes to some of these other steps, we've never seen them before. So I assume that they don't have these. Maybe they do at the Performance Center. They put a ladder in the ring and they have them practice and climb it. They should. If they're not already doing that, they should start doing that. But some of these women have never worked a ladder match before. So you can't just take 5, 6, 7 women who don't have experience working a match like that, and in some cases who don't even have a lot of experience, period, and just throw them in a Money in the Bank match and expect that, well, everything will be fine. Like, no. That has disaster written all over it. So I think before you kind of jump into the deep end of the pool, let's see a women's ladder match. One-on-one. But I'm not against the idea at all. I remember a great ladder match I saw once in TNA between Gail Kim and Taryn Terrell. Because Gail Kim is a great worker, and Taryn Terrell had improved a lot from where she had been. I'm sure working with Gail Kim had a lot to do with that. But they went out there and they killed it on Impact. They had a great ladder match. So I look at WWE and I say, man, you could do Sasha and whoever. You could do Mickie James and Becky Lynch could have a ladder match. Now, I guess if there's no championship and there's no briefcase, why have a ladder match? So I guess it would make sense for the champion to be involved. You could do Charlotte and someone. I was going to say Charlotte and Sasha, but I think we still need some more time before we go back to doing those one-on-one matches. But you see my point. Let's get something like that first before we take them all and put them in a match together. I mean, can you imagine Eva Marie in a Money in the Bank? Let's just stick Eva Marie in a Money in the Bank match. Like, if she didn't kill herself, she'd kill someone else. Some people just don't belong in matches like that. So it also depends on who you're going to put in there. Is it a combination of Raw and SmackDown women? I mean, you got to think about these things. But I'm not against the concept at all. Brian from Boston. Did you notice when Lesnar hit the ring at the Royal Rumble, he went right for Dean Ambrose and hit him what appeared to be very hard? Do you think that Brock did that because of Dean's comments on the Stone Cold podcast? I hadn't thought about that. I guess only Brock would know. I have no idea. You'd have to ask him. But, I don't ever see Brock Lesnar going in the ring and going soft on people. Like, that's the only speed he knows. Like, he went in there. He didn't just punch Dean. He was suplexing people. He gave people F5s. He goes in there, he beats the shit out of everybody. I don't really think it had to do like, oh, I gotta go after this guy first. I just think that's all he knows. He goes in there and he hits hard, and you better not be in the way when he does it. Noah from Paintsville, Kentucky. From his debut, I always liked the Drifter, Elias Sampson. But lately I feel like he's showing more personality, like this past NXT, waving goodbye to Corey Graves on his way out. I fear he's going to go down like CJ Parker, and once he really starts to gain traction, he'll get the axe. Do you think it's genuine go-away heat that he has, or do people just love to hate him? I think people just love to hate him. I think, and CJ Parker, I don't know if this is what you were saying, but CJ Parker never got the axe. Let's just clear that up. He chose to leave NXT. He probably saw there was no real future for him with that gimmick, and he wanted to get better and improve, and he went to Japan, and good for him. He's done well for himself. He's actually doing pretty good for himself right now over in Japan. But I just wanted to make that point. He never got the axe. He chose to leave. And again, the Drifter, I think it's just a case where people love to hate the guy. It's like a modern day, honky tonk man. I mean, part of it might just be go away heat, but look, he comes out and as soon as he starts stringing the guitar, people boo. Right? That's the kind of heel heat you want to have. Once he actually gets in the ring, I'm not overly impressed. He really doesn't do much for me. But there are a lot of guys on that roster, I'm sure, that would kill to have the kind of heat that he has. Marcos from Houston, Texas. What is your favorite Okada-Tanahashi match? I feel like every time these two are in the ring, they outdo their previous match. You're right. That's why their last Wrestle Kingdom match is my favorite one, Wrestle Kingdom 10. I think the Okada-Tanahashi rivalry will go down as one of the greatest of all time. Alberto from Laredo, Texas. Is New Japan Pro Wrestling considered an indie promotion? No. They're owned by a company called Bushiroad, and I think didn't they do like $22 or $25 million in revenue last year? They're far from an indie promotion. Hardy from Hagerstown, Maryland. I was listening to Sound Off 359 and you mentioned that Randy Savage versus Jake Roberts is your favorite WWE feud of all time. I'm not really familiar with it aside from the infamous Rumble 92 spot with Savage eliminating himself. Can you give a recap of the feud and what made it so special? But of course, we'd never miss an opportunity to talk about Randy Savage and Jake the Snake. The thing I loved about the feud, it's funny, you mentioned that my favorite of all, I guess it's one of my favorites of all time. I don't know if I had to make a list, would it end up in number 1, number 2? I don't know. But what I loved about it was, as a kid, and even now when I go back and watch it, was the sense of realism, how much of a bastard Jake was in that feud. It was dark. It was the kind of dark stuff that you really didn't see in WWF back then. I mean, this guy was sadistic. And the snake bite thing is what stands out. There's a couple of things that stand out to me. It's not just the snake bite. The snake bite thing stands out to a lot of people because it was pretty graphic stuff. Not not so much blood and guts and stuff, although there was blood on Savage's arm, but just the idea that this is not a rubber snake. This is not a puppet. This is not animatronics. This is real. This is a king cobra, whether it's defanged or not. I know they tried to build it up. Vince is going crazy. That snake better be devenomized. It better be. And I know the great story about how the snake died 12 days later because Savage poisoned the snake. But this is a real snake just gnawing away at this guy's arm. He's helpless. He's trapped in the ropes. They show kids crying in the crowd. Elizabeth runs down. This is her husband, and she's, Roddy Piper leaves the announce booth to grab Elizabeth. Everyone's running around. Just all this chaos. Nobody knows what to do. And the creepiest fucking looking snake I've ever seen in my life was that cobra when it was kind of sitting up and smiling. You see Jake smiling in the background. That is, let me tell you something. You couldn't pay me enough money, devenomized or not, to get bitten by a snake. Okay? Let alone a snake like that. That took balls. And that whole angle was just tremendous. You did that angle today, it would be just as graphic. It would be just as, I think just as scarring to a lot of little kids watching. And so then you fast forward to Tuesday in Texas. This was this pay-per-view experiment that they did. And they had two big matches they were promoting. One was the rematch. Undertaker had just won the championship from Hogan by a screw job at Survivor Series. So they were going to have the rematch. And on the undercard, they were going to do Macho Man against Jake the Snake. Macho Man had been reinstated. He was supposed to have been retired, but then this stuff happened with Jake, and so anyway, he got reinstated. And the match, I've said this, the matches that they had during the feud, they only had 2 matches on TV, and they weren't that great. And the Tuesday in Texas match was nothing. I don't even know that the match went 5 minutes, and Savage just beat him clean, I think, in the middle with an elbow drop. So in that respect, it was pretty disappointing. But it wasn't about the matches. It was about all the stuff going on around the matches and what happened post-match. When, Jake got his revenge, he ended up DDTing Savage and laying him out after the match. And again, Elizabeth runs down and he ends up grabbing Elizabeth and he slaps her right in the face. And this is the kind of stuff that you did not see. I know, like in the NWA, they did stuff with Baby Doll and stuff, but in WWF, as cartoony as the company was, you did not see like heavy angles like this. They did a lot of really goofy stuff, injury angles and whatnot. And like the next year we had Papa Shango putting a frickin' voodoo curse on the Ultimate Warrior. He's throwing up pea soup. They did a lot of stupid shit, but like heavy, serious stuff. And Elizabeth was this beloved character. So to be able to use her and she's trapped in the middle of all this, you really felt for her. And the promos. Here you have 2 of the best promo guys in the history of the business. Now they've got this real deep personal issue to kind of sink their teeth into here. And the promos leading up to and post-match were just tremendous. Jake just comes across as the slimiest son of a bitch you've ever seen. Gene Okerlund sold it perfectly when he's literally grabbing Gene and saying, "Oh man, it turned me on to touch her. It turned me on." And Gene's like, "You're a sick man. Get the hell out of here." And Savage had a complete meltdown. He collapses on the floor. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's maybe a little bit of overacting there, but everything about the feud, the promos, the players involved. They played their roles perfectly, and it to this day is probably the most memorable feud of that era. And it was so brief. It didn't last that long. It was only a few months. They only had a couple of matches. They did the blow-off on a Saturday Night's Main Event special instead of saving it for WrestleMania like I would have. And it was over. That was it. That was the only real crime about the whole thing, is that it could have gone on so much longer and it never got the payoff that it really deserved to get. And that is the biggest regret. Now, somebody in the Facebook group asked an interesting question this past week. They asked, if Ric Flair did not win the 1992 Rumble, or you had to pick a winner other than Ric Flair to win the 1992 Royal Rumble, who would you pick? Who would have been the best person to win the Rumble and the championship? Because remember, the title was on the line. Who would have been the right person? And I saw a lot of people, Sid, Hogan, Savage, all fine choices. Not one person said Jake the Snake. Until I popped in the thread and I said Jake the Snake. I'd have picked Jake for sure. Jake was in, maybe not physically, but in top form as a heel. I mean, the uber heel during that period. I think it would have been great to see him with the WWF title. He never held any championships in that company. It would have been short-lived. It only would have been a couple of months. But it would have been cool to see him with a belt. And on that, and I gave this some thought here, and I wanted to pitch this and see what people thought. On that Saturday Night's Main Event that they did the month after, which was like the second to last one of that era that they ever did, Hogan and Sid already had heat from what happened at the Rumble finish, right? Okay. So instead of having them tag up on the show the way they did, because on that special it was Hogan and Sid against Ric Flair and The Undertaker, which is a big match. But instead of doing that, why not just build right away, it's going to be Hogan versus Sid at WrestleMania to settle their issues. And so on that show, you have a contract signing for WrestleMania. So that's one feature of that Saturday Night's Main Event special. Hogan and Sid have a contract signing. And they cut promos on each other. The other draw of that special, you could do Randy Savage against The Undertaker. Because The Undertaker had been aligned with Jake for months leading up to the whole thing. They crashed the wedding party after the wedding at SummerSlam. So Undertaker was already kind of linked into that feud. He had formed an alliance with Jake the Snake. So you do that match on that show with the proviso that Savage has to beat The Undertaker in order to earn a championship match at WrestleMania 8. Because Jake doesn't want any part of Randy Savage. Randy Savage did not win the Royal Rumble. He did not automatically earn himself a trip to WrestleMania. Or I guess winning the Rumble, he would have won the championship. But Jake doesn't want to have anything to do with this guy. But if he could beat The Undertaker, he gets a title shot. Savage has the match won. Jake interferes. He and Undertaker beat the crap out of Savage. Maybe tie him up in the ropes again. Tease another snake bite, only this time Hogan runs down to make the save. I can never understand why nobody ran down the first time to help this guy, but I guess when there's a snake in the ring, I guess I can't blame him. If my friend were tied up in the ropes and there was a king cobra, I'd be like, oh, sorry, dude. I don't know what to... I mean, let's be honest here. It's a king cobra. Give me a break. I don't want to go anywhere near that thing. So this time Hogan comes out, makes the save, and I hope none of my friends are listening to this. If they have a snake, you can't rely on me to help them. So Hogan makes the save. Sid runs down. He attacks Hogan. All of a sudden, you've got total chaos to end this episode of Saturday Night's Main Event to build to WrestleMania 8. To build to your two main events. By the way, you could just substitute Flair for Sid in the same scenario. So I said, Hogan Sid have a contract signing. Hogan Sid is the match at WrestleMania. It doesn't have to be Hogan Sid. It could have been Hogan Flair. I just assumed that when this person asked the question, they were assuming, Flair never went to WWF. But if Flair did go to WWF and just didn't win the Rumble, you could just substitute Sid, out of the equation and put Flair in there and do the same thing with Ric Flair. And it's Hogan versus Flair. Either way, would be fine. But I love that scenario. I always I play What If a lot with that period because I'm actually a big fan of some of the stuff they did during that period. I know when you start getting into 93, 94, those are the real lean years for the company and there was a lot of garbage. But 91, 92, 93, there was also a lot of good stuff. And a lot of stuff that I remember fondly from when I was younger. And a lot of times I'll think back, man, if they just would have done this differently or if they would have done that differently. And it's kind of pointless, I suppose, but it's kind of fun to go back and imagine what could have been had they played things out a little bit differently than they did. I look at that WrestleMania card, I'm just saying, if it ends up being Savage and Jake for the title, maybe a loser leaves town since Jake was leaving anyway. Hogan versus Flair. You could do Undertaker against Sid. I'd pay for that card.